The morning my mother passed away during childbirth remains etched in my memory with a clarity that 23 years haven't been able to fade. I was 17, sitting in that sterile hospital waiting room, watching the second hand of the clock move in what felt like slow motion. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting everything in that harsh, unforgiving light that hospitals seem to specialize in. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept moving when mine had just stopped. My name is Emma, though back then I was Emily Richardson, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can become the very ones trying to destroy you. My mother, Grace Richardson, had been the kind of woman who made everyone feel seen. She taught English at our local high school in Portland, Oregon, and students would often stop by our house just to talk to her about books or life or whatever was weighing on their hearts. She had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world that mattered in that moment. Her classroom was always decorated with quotes from famous authors, and she'd change them every month. I still remember the one that was up the month before she died from Maya Angelou. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. How prophetic that would turn out to be. The pregnancy had been unexpected but welcomed with joy. Mum was 42 and the doctors had labelled it high risk from the start. But she'd sailed through the first 8 months with the same grace she approached everything else. She'd set up the nursery with soft yellows and greens, refusing to find out the baby's gender because she wanted to be surprised. She'd even picked out names, Charlotte for a girl, after Charlotte Bronte, and James for a boy, after James Baldwin. She was always finding ways to weave literature into our lives. Dad seemed different during those months. Michael Richardson was a successful insurance broker who spent more time at the office than at home, but that had always been our normal. What wasn't normal was how distracted he'd become, how his phone would buzz at odd hours, how he'd step outside to take calls even during dinner. Mum noticed too. I could see it in the way her smile would falter when he'd excuse himself again, but she never said anything. Maybe she was waiting until after the baby came to address it. Maybe she thought it was just work stress. We'll never know what she really thought because she took those thoughts with her when she died. The day it happened started like any other September morning in Portland, misty and cool, with that particular quality of light that makes everything look like a watercolour painting. Mum had been having some discomfort the night before, but nothing that seemed serious. She made me breakfast like always, scrambled eggs with cheese and toast cut into triangles the way I'd liked them since I was 5. We talked about my college applications. I was applying to 8 schools, all with strong English programs. I wanted to follow in her footsteps, to inspire young minds the way she did. By noon, the discomfort had turned into something more. Dad drove us to the hospital, and I sat in the back seat holding Mum's hand as she breathed through the contractions. She kept telling me everything would be fine, that soon I'd have a little sister or brother to boss around. She joked that I'd have to teach them all about proper grammar and the Oxford comma. Even in pain, she was thinking about language, about teaching. At the hospital, they whisked her away to labour and delivery. Dad and I weren't allowed in the room. Hospital policy for high-risk deliveries, they said. So we waited and waited. After 2 hours, a doctor came out with that expression medical professionals get when they have to deliver devastating news. The baby had been in distress. They'd performed an emergency cesarean. There had been complications, a rare amniotic fluid embolism. They'd done everything they could, but neither my mother nor my baby sister had survived. The word neither echoed in my head like a broken record. Neither, neither, neither. Such a simple word to carry such devastating weight. Dad collapsed into a chair, his face completely blank. I remember thinking he looked like someone had erased all his features, leaving just a vague outline of a person. But what I remember most from that moment was the nurse standing behind the doctor, her hand resting on the doorframe. She had striking red hair pulled back in a severe bun, and green eyes that seemed to be studying us with an intensity that felt inappropriate for the moment. She wore purple scrubs. I remember because Mum's favourite colour was purple, and it seemed like a cruel joke. That was Sandra Mitchell, though I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know that she'd been having an affair with my father for 8 months. I didn't know that she'd been the nurse assigned to my mother's delivery room. I didn't know a lot of things that would have changed everything if I had. The next days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and casseroles from well-meaning neighbours. The house felt hollow without Mum's presence, like someone had sucked all the warmth out of it. Her coffee mug still sat by the sink where she'd left it that morning. Her bookmark still marked her place in the Virginia Woolf novel she'd been reading. Everything waited for her to come back and continue her life, but she never would. Sandra appeared at the funeral. She stood in the back, wearing a black dress that was just a little too tight, a little too short for the occasion. She approached Dad afterward, placing her hand on his arm and murmuring condolences. Even through my grief, something about the familiarity of her touch set off alarm bells in my mind. This wasn't how a stranger offered comfort. This was how someone who knew you intimately touched you in public when they had to be careful. Dad started leaving the house in the evenings about a month after the funeral. He'd say he was going to grief counselling or to the gym or to meet with clients, but he'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't Mum's. I was too lost in my own grief to confront him about it. I spent most of my time in my room, reading and rereading Mum's favourite books, trying to feel close to her through the words she'd loved. 3 months after Mum died, Dad sat me down in the living room. The Christmas tree was up. I'd decorated it alone while he was at one of his meetings. He cleared his throat several times before speaking, a sure sign he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. "Emily," he began, using my full name, which he only did when he was being serious. "I know this might seem soon, but life has to go on. Your mother would want us to be happy." I stared at him, noting how he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "What are you talking about?" "I've met someone. Well, I've been seeing someone. Sandra, you might remember her from the hospital." The room tilted. I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. "The nurse? The one who was there when Mum died?" He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "She's been very supportive through all of this. She understands loss. She's helped me process everything." Process. The word came out sharp, accusatory. "Is that what we're calling it?" His face hardened. "Emily, you're 17. You don't understand what it's like to lose a spouse. Sandra has been a lifeline for me." "Mum's been dead for 3 months, I said, my voice rising. 3 months, Dad. Her clothes are still in the closet. Her shampoo is still in the shower. And you're already dating her nurse." "She wasn't her nurse," he said quickly. Too quickly. "She just happened to be working that day." But I saw the lie in the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, his tell when he was being dishonest. Mum had pointed it out to me once when he was lying about having quit smoking. The memory of her knowing smile made my chest ache. "I think you should meet her properly," he continued. "She's wonderful, Emily. She really wants to get to know you." I stood up, my mother's copy of Jane Eyre clutched in my hands. I'd been carrying it around like a talisman. "I'm not interested in meeting your girlfriend, Dad. Not now. Maybe not ever." "She's more than my girlfriend," he said, and something in his tone made me freeze. "I've asked her to marry me. She said yes." The book fell from my hands, hitting the floor with a thud that seemed to echo in the silence that followed. 6 months. It had been 6 months since Mom died, and he was already engaged to another woman, to the nurse who'd been in the room when she died. "You're joking," I whispered, but his face told me he wasn't. "Dad, you can't be serious. You can't marry her. It's too soon. It's wrong. Mum." "Your mother is gone," he cut me off, his voice harsh in a way I'd never heard before. "She's not coming back, Emily. I'm 45 years old. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life alone because you can't accept reality." "Reality?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "The reality is that you're marrying the woman who was probably the last person to see Mom alive. Doesn't that feel wrong to you? Doesn't that feel like a betrayal?" His face went red. Sandra tried to save her. She did everything she could. How dare you imply otherwise? But I wasn't implying anything, not yet. That would come later when I started putting the pieces together. For now, I was just a grieving 17-year-old who couldn't understand how her father could move on so quickly. They married on a rainy Tuesday in March at the courthouse. I refused to attend, spending the day instead at Mom's grave. I brought her purple irises and told her about my acceptance letter to Reed College. I'd gotten in early admission to their English program. She would have been so proud. I told her about the short story I'd written for my senior project, about a girl who finds her voice through books. Mrs. Peterson, my AP English teacher and Mum's former colleague, had said it was publishable. Sandra moved in the next day. She arrived with a U-Haul full of modern furniture and abstract art that clashed horribly with Mum's warm, book-filled aesthetic. The first thing she did was take down Mum's wind chimes from the front porch. "The sound gives me migraines," she explained, dumping them unceremoniously in a box marked garage sale. I rescued them later, hanging them in my room where they caught the afternoon light and made soft music when I opened my window. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt important. Sandra's transformation of our house was swift and merciless. Mum's garden, which had been her pride and joy, was ripped out and replaced with low-maintenance gravel and succulents. The reading nook where Mum used to grade papers became a home gym. The kitchen, which had always smelled like cinnamon and coffee, now reeked of Sandra's protein shakes and whatever fad diet she was following that week. But it wasn't just the physical changes that disturbed me. It was the way Sandra inserted herself into every aspect of our lives. She monitored my eating, commenting that I'd inherited my mother's tendency toward emotional eating. She went through my closet and donated anything she deemed frumpy, which included several sweaters Mum had knitted for me. She scheduled family meetings where she'd lecture me about my future while Dad sat silent beside her, nodding occasionally like a puppet. The first time she brought up nursing school was during one of these meetings. I was sorting through college brochures, excited about the prospect of studying creative writing and literature. Sandra picked up the Reed College pamphlet with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. "Have you considered something more practical?" she asked, her voice sweet but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. "Nursing, for instance. It's such a stable career. Good money, job security, and you're helping people. I could write you a recommendation letter for the program at OHSU. "I want to be a teacher," I said firmly, like Mom. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sandra's smile became fixed, plastic. "Of course your mother was lovely, but teachers don't make much money, Emily. And with the way education is going in this country, wouldn't you rather have a career that can actually support you?" "I don't care about money," I said. "I care about doing something meaningful." She laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. Spoken like someone who's never had to pay bills. "Michael, tell her." Dad cleared his throat. "Maybe you should at least consider it, Em. Keep your options open." I stared at him in disbelief. Mom had been a teacher. He'd never once suggested she should do something else for money. But then I was starting to realize this wasn't the same man who'd been my father before Mom died. Or maybe he'd always been this way, and Mom had just shielded me from it. The pressure increased as senior year progressed. Sandra would leave nursing school brochures on my bed. She'd accidentally delete emails from colleges before I could read them. She'd schedule tours of nursing programs without telling me, then act hurt when I refused to go. Dad backed her every step of the way, growing increasingly angry with what he called my stubbornness. The breaking point came in April. I'd been accepted to several colleges with excellent English programs, including a full scholarship to Whitman College in Walla Walla. I'd been waiting to hear from them specifically because Mum had always spoken highly of their creative writing program. When the acceptance letter finally arrived, courtesy of Mrs. Chen next door, who'd received our mail by mistake, I discovered why I hadn't heard from them sooner. Sandra had hidden it, along with several other acceptance letters. I confronted them that evening, laying out all the mail Mrs. Chen had given me. Dad's face went through several expressions: surprise, anger, and finally a cold indifference that chilled me more than any rage could have. "We were trying to protect you," Sandra said smoothly. "These liberal arts colleges will fill your head with useless ideas and leave you with nothing but debt. We've taken the liberty of submitting applications to several nursing programs on your behalf. You've already been accepted to 3. "You what?" I could barely get the words out. "You applied to colleges in my name. That's fraud. That's illegal." "It's not illegal when your parent does it," Dad said. "I'm still your legal guardian for another month." "Mum would never have let you do this," I said, my voice shaking. "She would have fought for me. She would have wanted me to follow my dreams." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My head snapped to the side, and I tasted blood where my teeth cut my cheek. Dad stood over me, his hand still raised, breathing heavily. Sandra watched from her seat at the kitchen table, filing her nails as if nothing had happened. "Your mother is dead," Dad said quietly, "and you will not use her memory to manipulate me. You'll go to nursing school, or you'll find somewhere else to live." I held my hand to my burning cheek, staring at this stranger wearing my father's face. "I'll take option 2. That night, I started researching. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, beyond just the betrayal of my college dreams. Mum had been healthy throughout her pregnancy. She'd gone to every appointment, taken every vitamin, done everything right. Amniotic fluid embolisms were rare, especially in closely monitored high-risk pregnancies. I requested Mum's medical records, claiming I needed them for insurance purposes. When they arrived, I spent hours going through them, looking for something, anything, that might explain what had happened. What I found made my blood run cold. There were gaps in the timeline, medications that were listed as administered, but at dosages that didn't match standard protocols. And most damning, Sandra's signature on documents she shouldn't have been authorized to sign, dated before she was officially assigned to Mum's case. I dug deeper. Dad's credit card statements, which I found in the garage while pretending to pack for college, showed charges at hotels dating back 8 months before Mum died. Hotels across town, paid for in the middle of the day when he was supposed to be at work. Restaurant charges for 2 at places Mum had never been. The affair had been going on for months before Mum died, and Sandra had been her nurse. I called the hospital's medical records department, pretending to be a journalism student doing a project on maternal mortality. The helpful clerk told me more than she probably should have, including that there had been an internal review of Mum's case, but that it had been closed without action. "These things happen," she said sadly, "sometimes despite our best efforts. But what if it hadn't been their best efforts? What if someone had wanted my mother to die?" The thought was so monstrous I couldn't fully form it, but it lodged in my brain like a splinter. I started documenting everything: the timeline of the affair, the medical inconsistencies, Sandra's behavior since moving in. I hid everything in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, paid for with cash I'd saved from tutoring jobs. My 18th birthday came and went with little fanfare. Sandra made a cake, some sugar-free, gluten-free monstrosity that tasted like cardboard. Dad gave me a card with a check for nursing school application fees. I smiled and thanked them, all while finalizing my plans to leave. The next week, while packing for what they thought was nursing school orientation, I made a discovery that changed everything. I needed my birth certificate for enrollment paperwork and found it in Dad's home office filing cabinet. But when I really looked at it for the first time, I saw something that made the room spin. Under Father, the name wasn't Michael Richardson, it was Marcus Williams. I sat on the floor of the office, staring at this document that undid everything I thought I knew about my life. Marcus Williams. The name meant nothing to me, but it explained everything. Why Dad had always been a little distant, even before Mom died. Why he'd moved on so quickly. Why he seemed almost relieved to be rid of her. I wasn't his daughter. I was some other man's child, and he'd been stuck raising me for 17 years. My hands shook as I Googled the name. Marcus Williams, Portland, Oregon. The search results were sparse, but I found an obituary from when I was 2 years old. He'd been a contractor, killed in a car accident on Highway 26 during a winter storm. The obituary mentioned he was survived by a daughter, Emily. Me, the obituary photo showed a man with my eyes, my nose, my stubborn chin. There was no denying the resemblance. This stranger was my father, and the man I'd called Dad my entire life was, what? A placeholder. A man who'd been trapped in a marriage with a woman who'd had another man's child. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved everything back in the filing cabinet. Dad, Michael, appeared in the doorway, his face flushed. He saw what I was holding and lunged forward, snatching the birth certificate from my hands. The paper tore down the middle, leaving me holding half of the evidence of my true parentage. "You had no right," he slurred, bourbon heavy on his breath. Sandra appeared behind him, still in her scrubs from work. "What did she find?" she asked, but Michael was already stumbling back downstairs, the torn certificate crumpled in his fist. Sandra studied me with those cold green eyes. "Well, well, so you finally know the truth. Your mother was quite the saint, wasn't she, getting pregnant by another man and tricking poor Michael into marrying her?" "That's not what happened," I said, though I had no idea what had actually happened. "No? Then why did she never tell you about your real father? Why did she let you believe a lie your entire life?" Sandra stepped closer, and I could smell her perfume, something cloying and sharp. "She was a liar and a manipulator, and the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it?" "My mother was a good person," I said, backing toward my room. "Whatever happened, she had her reasons." "Her reasons?" Sandra laughed. "Her reason was that Marcus Williams was a broke contractor, and Michael Richardson had good insurance and a stable job. She chose security over love, and then spent 17 years making him raise another man's child. At least when she died, he was finally free." The implication in her words made my stomach turn. "What do you mean, finally free?" Sandra's smile was sharp as a blade. "I mean that sometimes the universe has a way of correcting mistakes. Your mother's death was tragic, of course, but it opened the door for Michael and me to be together." "Finally, you killed her," I whispered, the words coming out before I could stop them. "You did something. The medication doses, the gaps in the timeline, you killed her." For a moment, Sandra's mask slipped, and I saw something truly terrifying in her eyes. Then she laughed again, light and carefree. "What an imagination you have. No wonder you want to be a writer, making up stories out of nothing. Be careful, Emily. That kind of talk could be considered slander or a sign of mental instability. Grief can do terrible things to a young mind." She left me standing in the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I had to lean against the wall for support. I knew then that I had to leave. Not eventually, not after graduation, but immediately. That night, I packed only the essentials: clothes, important documents, Mum's journal that I'd hidden in my closet, and the half of the birth certificate I still had. I called Jessica, my best friend since middle school, and asked if I could stay with her family for a while. Her parents, who had known and loved my mother, agreed immediately. I left at 3 a.m, when I knew Michael would be passed out, and Sandra would be deep in her Ambien-induced sleep. I took my car, technically still in Mom's name, so legally mine, and drove away from the house that had once been my home. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and police reports. Jessica's mother, a paralegal, helped me file for a restraining order against Sandra based on the harassment and the implied threats. The police said they couldn't investigate Mum's death without more concrete evidence, but they did take my report seriously enough to flag Sandra's nursing license for review. Sandra and Michael didn't take my leaving quietly. They called Jessica's parents, claiming I'd stolen money and medication. They called my school, saying I was having a mental breakdown. They called every college I'd been accepted to, trying to withdraw my applications. But I was 18 now, and with Jessica's mother's help, I fought back against every attack. The nursing board investigation revealed that Sandra had a history of being involved in unfortunate incidents at previous hospitals. Never enough to prosecute, but enough to establish a pattern. 3 elderly patients who died unexpectedly. A co-worker who became violently ill after Sandra brought her coffee. Always explainable, always just shy of provable. I started my freshman year at Whitman College with a new understanding of the world. It wasn't the carefree college experience I'd imagined when Mum and I had toured campuses together, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies, particularly creative writing and psychology. Understanding human nature, the dark parts people hide, became almost an obsession. My professors noted the darkness in my work, the way my characters always seemed to be running from something or uncovering terrible secrets. Dr. Chen, my freshman composition professor, pulled me aside after a particularly intense short story about a daughter discovering her mother's murder. "This is powerful work, Emily," she said, "but I'm concerned. Are you talking to anyone about what you're processing?" I started seeing a counselor at the Student Health Centre. Dr. Patel helped me work through not just the trauma of losing my mother and the revelation about my biological father, but the gaslighting and manipulation I'd endured from Sandra and Michael. She helped me understand that my hypervigilance and trust issues were normal responses to abnormal situations. Meanwhile, Sandra's harassment continued. She created fake social media accounts to follow my friends and classmates, spreading rumors about my mental health. She called professors claiming to be a concerned family member, warning them about my violent tendencies. She even showed up on campus once, but security removed her after I showed them the restraining order. Michael, for his part, seemed to have washed his hands of me entirely. The man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and had attended my school plays, acted as if I'd never existed. It was actually worse than Sandra's active harassment. At least her behaviour showed I still existed in her world. Michael's complete erasure of me from his life felt like a second death. I changed my name legally during sophomore year. Emily Richardson became Emma Williams, honouring both my biological father and the person I was becoming, someone who refused to be defined by lies and manipulation. The process felt like shedding a skin that had never quite fit. My junior year, I received an unexpected message. A woman named Beth Williams had found me through my writing. I'd published a piece about identity and family secrets in a literary magazine. She was Marcus Williams's sister, my aunt. We met at a coffee shop in Seattle, and I saw my own features reflected in her face. She cried when she saw me, reaching across the table to touch my hand as if to make sure I was real. "We always wondered," she said. "Marcus told me he'd gotten a woman pregnant, but she'd chosen to marry someone else. He was heartbroken, but he respected her choice. He never knew if the baby was born, if it was a boy or girl. He died still wondering." Beth filled in the gaps in the story. Mum had been dating Marcus when she was young, just out of college. When she got pregnant, he'd proposed immediately, but he was struggling financially. Michael, who'd been pursuing her relentlessly, offered stability and security. Mom had made a practical choice, but according to Beth, Marcus never stopped loving her. "He drove by your house sometimes," Beth admitted, "just to catch a glimpse of you. He knew you were his. You looked just like him even as a baby. But your mother asked him to stay away, said it would be better for everyone. He respected that, but it killed him. The car accident that took his life happened after one of those drive-bys. He'd been crying," Beth said, "and didn't see the ice on the road. In a way, Mum's choice had killed him too." Beth became a constant in my life after that. She shared photos of Marcus, told me stories about his childhood, helped me piece together the parts of myself that had always felt like a mystery. She had no children of her own, and I became the daughter she'd never had. Through Beth, I learned that Marcus had left a small life insurance policy, and as his biological daughter, I was the beneficiary. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hire a private investigator to look deeper into Mom's death. What he found confirmed my worst suspicions. Sandra had been present at 3 other maternal deaths in her career, all ruled as tragic accidents or unavoidable complications. All involved women whose husbands she later dated. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked, but no one had ever connected the dots before. The investigator also discovered that Sandra had access to medications that, in the wrong doses, could trigger the exact complications Mom had experienced. The gaps in the medical records coincided with Sandra's shifts. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Armed with this information, I went back to the police. This time, they listened. The investigation was reopened, and Sandra was arrested on suspicion of murder. The trial was a media sensation. "Nurse Black Widow," the headline screamed. I testified about the harassment, the threats, the pattern of behavior I'd uncovered. Michael testified too, but for the defense. He claimed Sandra was a loving wife who'd been nothing but kind to his troubled stepdaughter. He painted me as a delusional girl who couldn't accept her mother's death. It was painful to watch the man who'd raised me lie so smoothly, but it also freed me from any lingering obligation to think of him as family. The jury didn't believe him. Sandra was convicted of manslaughter, not the murder charge I'd hoped for, but enough to send her to prison for 15 years. As they led her away, she looked at me with such hatred that the bailiff stepped between us. "This isn't over," she mouthed. But it was, at least for a long time. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in English and a minor in psychology. My senior thesis on trauma narratives in contemporary women's literature was published in an academic journal. At the ceremony, Beth sat in the front row with Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Chen, the 3 women who'd become my chosen family. I was accepted into a prestigious MFA program at the University of Iowa, known for its writing program. The distance from Portland felt necessary. Sandra would be in prison for years, but Michael was still out there, and I didn't trust him not to reappear in my life if I stayed too close. Iowa was where I truly found my voice as a writer. Surrounded by others who understood the power of storytelling to process trauma, I began writing the novel I'd been carrying inside me since Mom's death. Not a memoir, that felt too raw, too exposing, but a fiction that carried emotional truth. The novel, titled The Inheritance, followed a young woman uncovering family secrets after her mother's suspicious death. It was dark, twisty, with the kind of unreliable narrator that kept readers guessing until the very end. My workshop loved it, and my thesis advisor, a best-selling author himself, offered to send it to his agent. To my amazement, the book sold at auction to a major publisher. The advance was modest by industry standards, but life-changing for a graduate student living on teaching assistant wages. I used part of it to set up a scholarship at Mom's High School for students pursuing creative writing. The book came out the same week I graduated with my MFA. Reviews were mixed, but generally positive, with critics praising the authentic portrayal of grief and gaslighting. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience, particularly among women who'd experienced similar family betrayals. At readings, women would approach me with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of discovering that the people they trusted most had been lying to them. We'd stand in bookstores and libraries, strangers bound by shared experience, finding healing in the acknowledgement that we weren't alone and weren't crazy. I took a position as an assistant professor at a small liberal arts college in Minnesota. The winters were brutal, but the distance from my past felt like safety. I taught composition and creative writing, trying to channel Mum's gift for making students feel seen and heard. My office door was always open, just like hers had been. It was during my 3rd year of teaching that Sandra was released from prison. She'd served 10 years of her 15-year sentence, released early for good behavior. Beth called to warn me, and the old hypervigilance returned immediately. I installed new locks, security cameras, and informed campus security of the situation. For months, nothing happened. I almost let myself believe she'd moved on, found a new life somewhere far from me. Then the letters started arriving. They came to my office, not my home. She'd found where I worked, but not where I lived. The first few were standard harassment, calling me a liar, a homewrecker, claiming I'd destroyed her life. I turned them over to the police, who said they'd monitor the situation but couldn't do anything unless she made a direct threat. The letters escalated. She wrote about how she'd thought of me every day in prison, how I'd stolen her happiness, how karma would catch up with me. She never quite crossed the line into actionable threats, but the menace was clear. Then she found where I lived. I came home one evening to find my front door slightly open. Nothing was missing or disturbed, but she'd been inside my space, violated my sanctuary. She'd left one thing: a copy of my book with every page torn out except the dedication to my mother, written across it in red ink. She's still dead. I moved the next week, staying with a colleague while I found a new place. The police increased patrols, but Sandra had learned from her mistakes. She stayed just within the bounds of legal harassment, never giving them enough to arrest her. The stress affected my teaching, my writing, my health. I wasn't sleeping, jumped at every sound, checked my rearview mirror obsessively. My department chair, a kind woman named Dr. Morrison, who knew my history, suggested I take a sabbatical. "Write," she said. "Go somewhere safe and write. We'll be here when you're ready to come back." I took her advice, subletting a cabin in the mountains of Colorado. It was isolated enough that Sandra couldn't find me easily, but connected enough that I could still teach online courses for income. I spent my days writing and hiking, slowly piecing myself back together. It was there that I started my second novel. This one wasn't about family secrets or murder, but about resilience, about women finding their strength in the aftermath of trauma. It was lighter than my first book, touched with hope I hadn't felt when I wrote The Inheritance. 6 months into my sabbatical, Beth called with news. Sandra had been arrested again, this time for attempting to poison her new boyfriend's ex-wife. She'd gotten sloppy, desperate, and this time the evidence was undeniable. She was facing life in prison. "It's over," Beth said. "Really over this time." I cried for an hour after hanging up. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it felt like grief. The woman who'd haunted my life for over a decade was finally gone for good. I finished my second novel in that cabin, then returned to teaching with a renewed sense of purpose. The book, After the Storm, was published to critical acclaim and actually hit some regional bestseller lists. I did a book tour this time, no longer afraid of being visible. At a reading in Portland, my hometown I'd avoided for so long, Michael showed up. He sat in the back, looking older and smaller than I remembered. When the signing line ended, he approached my table. "Emma," he said, using my chosen name for the first time, I wanted to apologize. I studied the man who'd raised me and betrayed me in equal measure. His hands shook slightly, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath even from across the table. "For what specifically?" I asked, my voice steady. He flinched. "All of it. Believing her over you, not protecting you, not being the father you deserved, even if you weren't my biological father," I finished. "You made your choice, Michael. You chose her over the daughter you'd raised for 18 years. That's not something an apology can fix." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I know. I wanted you to know that I know I was wrong. Your mother, Grace, she was a good woman, better than I deserved. And you're just like her." He left without buying a book, shuffling out into the Portland rain. It was the last time I saw him. He died 2 years later of liver failure, alone in a studio apartment. I didn't attend the funeral, but I did send flowers. For the man he'd been before Sandra, the father who'd taught me to ride a bike and read me bedtime stories, even knowing I wasn't his blood, I'm 40 now, a full professor with tenure, 3 published novels, and a life I've built from the ashes of tragedy. I never married, though I've had meaningful relationships with people who understand that trust doesn't come easily to me. I have a small circle of chosen family, Beth, who emails me every week, Mrs. Peterson, now retired, but still my first reader for everything I write, colleagues who've become true friends. My office is decorated with quotes from famous authors, just like Mum's classroom was. I change them every month, and my students have started to anticipate what each new quote will be. This month, it's Virginia Woolf. Books are the mirrors of the soul. Mum would have loved that. Sometimes I dream about her, not nightmares about her death, but quiet dreams where we're sitting in her garden, talking about books and life and all the things we never got to discuss. In these dreams, she knows about Marcus, about Sandra, about everything that came after, and she always says the same thing. You found your voice, baby girl. That's all I ever wanted for you. I teach my students about the power of storytelling, about how putting our truths on paper can transform trauma into art. I tell them about my mother, the English teacher who believed in the magic of words. I don't tell them everything. Some stories are mine alone to carry, but I tell them enough to understand that literature isn't just about pretty sentences. It's about survival. Every September, on the anniversary of her death, I visit Mum's grave. I bring purple irises and sit on the grass, telling her about my year. I tell her about my students, the ones who remind me of myself at that age, lost and angry and desperately seeking something to believe in. I tell her about my writing, how each book feels like a conversation with her across the void. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear her wind chimes in the distance, playing their gentle song. It's probably just my imagination, but I choose to believe it's her way of saying she's proud of the woman I've become. The woman who refused to be silenced, who found her voice in the darkest of circumstances, who turned her pain into purpose. Because that's what she taught me, really. Not just how to analyze literature or write a perfect thesis statement, but how to survive. How to take the broken pieces of a life and reassemble them into something new, something beautiful in its imperfection. How to be the author of your own story even when others try to write it for you. Sandra is still in prison, where she'll likely die. Michael is gone. The house I grew up in belongs to strangers now, but I'm still here, still writing, still teaching, still honoring my mother's memory with every student I inspire, every story I tell, every life I touch. And in the end, that's the greatest revenge against those who tried to destroy me. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just finding my voice, but using it to help others find theirs. Mum always said there was no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Thanks to her, I'll never have to carry that burden. My story has been told, and I'm finally truly free.